Now you're in one of the top five mining jurisdictions in the world, Alaska, and that's according to a 2020 Fraser Institute of Mining survey. It did drop from the fourth place in 2019 to 2020, so it's going to be interesting in a couple of weeks. I'm hoping to see the next survey for 2021. Um, so I guess in terms of mineral potential and political mining code, you're okay there, right? I mean, is there something that you want to tell me about it?
I think you hit on it. Alaska, the history of Alaska is a mining state. The capital Juneau is the reason Juneau exists where it is today is because the AJ, Alaska Juneau mine. So that was one of the first gold mines in Alaska, and the bulk of the state capital was built on the tailings from the AJ, which back in the prior to World War II, most people don't realize was really one of the largest, most mechanized and efficient gold mines in the world. Very, very efficient. It was shut down because of labor shortages in World War II. The other Kennecott is, of course, the other most famous mine in Alaska. The start of Kennecott Copper Corporation in the 1920s and 30s, and really one of the best ore deposits discovered and mined and world history. The Guggenheims did quite well and made their fortune at Kennecott. So it's certainly has a history of both mining and natural resources. Where we're located in Western Alaska, it is remote. There's no question that we're 270 miles from Fairbanks and the same distance from Anchorage. But most importantly, we're only 28 miles from the Yukon River. So in this part of the state, the Yukon River is really, we call it, is our highway. It's a 1,200 mile from Tidewater to Whitehorse in the Yukon. During the Klondike days, stern wheeler ships went all the way up and down. That's how everybody got to Dawson and Whitehorse. So once you
Mm.
get on the Yukon River, you have access to river barge traffic, or in this case, where we are, the river is about 2 miles wide and about 50 feet deep, and you can bring ocean-going barges out of Seattle, Vancouver, right up to our potential future barge site. So you have to look at all the aspects of really how you access mineral properties. And then, as Joe will talk little bit later, grade is king. And so as long as you have high grade, high metal value per ton, high margin deposits, you can pay for the infrastructure.
Mm. What about social tensions or something like that over there? Are there any indigenous people or any other people who maybe don't want you to know, you say it's remote, or is it any, I don't know, community, or is this something like what I'm thinking, but what I'm getting at is that, the Clean Water Act, which is a thing that's challenging Pebble, right? And I guess when people look it up, you know what? I looked you up on YouTube. I type Western Alaska. One of the first video that pops up is a video that USA Today did on Pebble and how the people don't want it. They want to keep their salmon or whatever, right? And so how's that over there?
Very, very good question. Pebble is very unusual. It's one of the largest copper gold deposits in the world, and it sits in the headwaters of by far the largest salmon fishery in the world. Bristol Bay, which Pebble would drain into, is probably, not sure the exact number, 90% of the world's salmon stock. So extremely critical from that standpoint. Difference though, and we certainly in Western Alaska are right in the center of some of the oldest indigenous native villages in the state. Nulato, which is one of the areas that we very proud to have a strong local hire policy, was one of the first villages that the Russian fur traders found when they entered Alaska in the 1700s. So it's a very long history. Very little private employment. The employment rates are probably in the 30% range. And most importantly, I think that we can point at is when Illinois Creek was in production in 1996, 97, and then the reclamation work in 2020, 2001, 2002, that this was a large employer of the local people. So when we go to the villages today, really the question we're asked is, when are you going to reopen? We would like to have a job. And mining, as said, is a long history in Alaska. It fits in with the local indigenous culture. It's something that they understand and, for the most part, support.
How's Alaska in terms of taxes, by the way? Is that something special, something different?
It is special. Alaska does not have an income tax, and Alaska does not have a sales tax. So I guess it's special in those two aspects. Not too many places can. I don't know how Belgian is for sales tax and income tax, but
Don't ask.
I think it's probably a little higher. We are subject to. We're on state of Alaska lands, so Alaska has a production tax. I think it's a couple percent of net profits, and
3%.
it's 3%. So it's once you go into production, there are certain accounting rules, but basically they allow for the operating expenses, and then there is, whether it's a tax or think of it as a net profit royalty, but that is where the state generates their share of the income from state of Alaska lands. So North Slope is obviously on state of Alaska land, and that is the royalty from Prudhoe Bay is probably about 75% of the operating revenue for the state of Alaska. So they're very, very focused on natural resources.
If they're focused, does that mean that the permitting process is relatively straightforward? Like if you'd compare it to other states or other countries like Canada?
So we're on state lands. The Alaska Department of Natural Resources, Mining, Land, and Water, that is our regulator. So, but they want to see natural resources be successful, both from a revenue standpoint and then from an employment standpoint. That's where people are employed in Alaska. So the setup that we currently operate under, compared to if you have federal jurisdiction or other countries, our exploration permits are granted in 5-year periods. We put out maps that show where we think we'll be drilling on a particular project and where the water sources are. That changes every year, and everybody understands exploration is a fluid business. So as we move to one area versus another, we just turn in an amendment every year that shows where we drilled in the past year and if we have new areas where we're focused on. But it's a 5-year permit, so it's in place. We don't have that year-to-year uncertainty that is so common everywhere else. Alaska is very unusual in that every ongoing major mine in Alaska is part of what the state calls the large mine permit team. And it's under the governor's office. So it's managed from that standpoint. And what they do is they become, we signed up and are part of that the last 2 years. The governor's office becomes our advocate. And what they do is they bring in all the different agencies and help organize the agencies to when do they want to do their reports? When do they want to do their permits? And they keep them on a schedule. And so it's a little different than having 20 different agencies that we have to go out and find and ask to please respond to letters and stuff. And so the large mine permit team basically runs that process. And if a particular agency doesn't get back to everybody on a timely basis, they talk to them, and that becomes not a problem. So it's a very efficient and very well run process.
Yeah, no. You said one of the problems you could run up against, and then even being in Belgium, even being used to rain and cold, one of the other problems, one of the other challenges that you could run up against is it gets pretty cold in Alaska, right? Western Alaska, I guess it's not Northern Alaska, but you're still in a lot more to the north than I am. So how's the weather there? What can you tell me about it? What are the working months? Because that's something that you mentioned. What do you do in the off months when you're not working? Just generally talking about the weather.
Well, first of all, it is seasonal from an exploration standpoint, and that's because the type of work you're doing. When Illinois Creek was in production, it was a year-round operation. So, and Right now, the major mines in Alaska would be Fort Knox, Kinross Gold outside of Fairbanks. That's a traditional open pit heap leach. Fairbanks is cold and they operate 12 months a year and they produce about 350,000 ounces a year. Pogo is underground, so it's a lot easier to work underground in the winter than it is the open pit. Exploration, we can start in this year. We plan to start drilling in May. We'll have our teams opening up the camp in April. We don't have a lot of snow on the ground. The interior Alaska is really pretty dry. So we'll have probably 2 or 3 feet of snow that will be cleared, open up our runway, and then probably by mid-May, suddenly it's summertime, and we'll have temperatures, so talking Fahrenheit, but 75, 80 degrees, 90 degrees in the summertime is not unusual. And then the season continues into September and October from an exploration standpoint. Last year we drilled until right around the end of September, but as we add more infrastructure, we'll extend that into early November. And water really is the key to that. Drilling needs water, so you have to have a water source, a water well that doesn't freeze up. But the Canadians have certainly conquered all those obstacles, and they very commonly just drill year round throughout Canada. So we just need to bring their technology, which we'll be doing that into Alaska.
You really need to just set up for those sorts of conditions. At Donlin Creek, where I worked for quite some time, we drilled into after U.S. Thanksgiving, so the beginning of December.
Okay.
The biggest challenge is basically water, and you're pretty far north, so just the seasonality of the darkness. From a safety standpoint, helicopters can't fly, harder to fly into kind of a remote airstrip, supported. Although where we're drilling, we don't need to have a helicopter. It's road supported, but the site itself is isolated. So there's a safety issue for those kind of 3 or 4 darkest months where it's really best not to operate from that standpoint. But certainly all the mines, everyone does when you scale up to a mine sense, you work year round. It's not ultimately an issue. So
Okay. Yeah, that about answers my question. What else about Alaska? Why don't you, maybe, gentlemen, you can give me one of the things that you don't like about being there? Because, it cannot be all flowers and roses, right? What are some of the challenges that each of you have experienced? Like, what is the thing that you like the least about it, so to call it, Mr. Morris? And what is the thing that you like the least about it, Mr. Pekenbrock?
Well, in the summer when you're drilling and doing geology, if it's a really rainy season as we had last year, then that gets old if you have just continuous days of rain. But it's an exciting place to work. Most people, when they visit Alaska, whether it's for tourism or for work, there's some people that don't like being out in a remote area, and other people that is really what they look for and enjoy. So I really enjoy working in the remote areas such as Illinois Creek. I've worked all over the state, from the Brooks Range to Southeast Alaska, the Alaska Peninsula, Nome. It's just a fantastic place, and it's very exciting. It's something that's stimulating, and the majority of people that work for us want to come back, year after year. So it's not all sun and roses, but there's enough of that to overcome, the downsides.
I think from my perspective, the real challenge has always been the cyclicity of the markets. You build out teams, you focus on something. It's such a boom or bust business on when you actually raise capital and can be effective. I look at it, my history in Alaska. I've really made my career in picking up good opportunities that didn't have the capital behind them to really find something and move forward. But you're really trapped into that cyclicity as you have windows. When you have a boom market, it's easy to finance. You can build in continuity, but then suddenly it falls apart for whatever reason that might be. I mean, look at 2008, look at 2000. It was basically a heap leach scenario in the late 90s. It never had the focus. You had a fall in metal prices, and the project was reclaimed. Those teams all fall apart, move on. It's really hard to have stability as an explorationist anywhere in the world. So, you have to make a lot of commitments to people, and you build a lot of hope in people. You really want to see those fruition, and the successful projects get over that hurdle. But, I'm still waiting for projects I've worked on to be built because they haven't hit the market timing exactly right. So there's a lot of that edge into the existence of an explorationist, is that you're always looking to get the timing just right to really bring wealth to the market. So
I think I got the gist of it.
It's a real up or down business, and I'm having been in it in 40 plus years in the field now.
What about something that I'm just off the top of my head could sound silly to you, but may be a good topical point to talk about? What about Alaska's proximity to Russia? Like, I'm not a geopolitical expert. I'm 26. I'm no type of expert really at all. But so, is there anything at all in relation to Russia that might become something, or something that you've increased your attention on, or just something?
Yeah. Oh, I can take that, Joe. It's not something that would, I think, influence any of our decisions or things that we do. Now, is Alaska very important to the U.S. from a defense standpoint? The answer is unequivocally yes. So Alaska had what's called the DEW system, Distant Early Warning, first international radar that was set up in the post-World War II. That's an example there. Galena, which is one of the villages that we hire out of, 65 miles due north of us. Most people have never heard of Galena, but up until 2005, it was an F-16 squadron base. Nome, Alaska had a squadron, King Salmon, places most people have never heard of. So it's very important from a U.S. defense standpoint. U.S. military and Anchorage and Fairbanks are substantial. The anti-ballistic missile defense system that's been designed and invented a few years ago is based outside of Fairbanks. The new F-16, F-35 fighter plane, that's the new state-of-the-art. I live in Tucson, Arizona, which is very much has been an Air Force town. There's one squadron based in Tucson. Currently, there are 3 F-35 squadrons in Fairbanks and 2 in Anchorage. So it's probably about 40% of the U.S. Arsenal of that particular plane. So that just gives you an example of how important Alaska is. There's probably weekly intercepts between U.S. and Russian planes over the frontier between the two countries. So it's very, very common and been happening for 30, 40 years. So maybe a little more common in the last year or so than a few years ago. But so that just gives you a little bit of background.